talking about the ocean, are they becoming acidic?
No. It is actually impossible to make the oceans acidic. They are using the word acidic when they are meaning less alkaline. Alkaline is the opposite of acidic. The pH scale goes from 0 to 14, where 0 to 7 is acid, and 7 to 14 is alkaline or basic. Those two words mean exactly the same thing. I prefer to use alkaline and acidic. And it is actually impossible to make the seas acidic no matter what you put in it. There is so much basic minerals like magnesium and calcium and sodium in the sea that it could never be made acidic. Rainwater is acidic, and lakes and rivers are generally slightly acidic, and life is living in them just fine, but not so much as in the sea, because the sea has more nutrients in it and is just where life began. It began in the sea, not in the lakes. It migrated to the lakes in the same way that it migrated to the land eventually, but it began in the sea, in that environment. Now, the most interesting fact is that carbon dioxide is one of the main gases which is dissolved in the sea. And carbon dioxide is acidic. It produces carbonic acid if you put it in fresh water, for example. So fizzy water which has had carbon dioxide put into it on purpose, like in beer makes carbon dioxide too. The fizz in water and beer is carbon dioxide, and in champagne. That makes those drinks slightly more acidic than they would be if they didn't have that fizz in them. In the ocean, carbon dioxide is the only reason, not only for the food for the plants in the ocean, but for the pH of the ocean. If it were not for carbon dioxide dissolved in the sea, the pH of the sea would be 11.3. The same as Drano, the cleaner you use to clean your drains in your house where the water goes out, which is very, very alkaline. It can burn you, right? It can burn you. Whereas the CO2 in the oceans modifies the alkalinity to make it lower into 7.8 to 8.4 in most areas of open ocean. So there's a variation in the alkalinity of the oceans all over the world. But to call it ocean acidification is propaganda in itself, just using the word acidification, because people think of acids as being something that burns you, something that's toxic, etc., whereas they don't think of alkaline as toxic, even though highly alkaline solutions like Drano, I don't know what your word for this is in Danish, but it's the very strong chemical that you pour in your sink to clean the fat and other materials out, to make your water flow properly. That is highly poisonous as well.
Yeah.
It's just that we're triggered to think of the word acid as a bad word, and the word alkaline is not thought of as a bad word. The oceans are alkaline, they always will be, and carbon dioxide dissolved in the oceans is the reason why they can support life, not only because of the fact that carbon dioxide is the food for the life in the oceans, but because it reduces its alkalinity to a level which life can live in, whereas it could not live in the oceans just because of the alkalinity, never mind the food value, if there was no CO2. So CO2 provides these two extremely important factors for life in the sea, which is where it began.
First time I heard about this world oceans becoming acidic, my first thought was, how do you measure that? How do you measure a world ocean pH? Kind of like impossible mission to do that in a regular basis.
That's because it's a fairy tale, not a scientific fact. So it's easy to measure things in a fairy tale. They cannot measure the pH of the oceans everywhere. the pH of the oceans varies from place to place way more than they say it's going to change from CO2 going in it. There's no way you can do that. It's the same with the temperature of the oceans. They say the oceans are heating up. Well, it's not as if they have a thermometer at 6,000 meters in the oceans. This is all theoretical. It's all based on either insufficient data or no data with a computer model or whatever. They make stuff up. That's one of their hallmarks, is they're good at inventing things that don't actually exist. And they're saying, we couldn't, actually the concept of pH was not invented until the early 1900s. The concept of it. And a tool to measure it was not invented until the 1920s into the 1930s. We didn't even have a tool that could measure pH until then. It's actually not an easy thing. A continuous monitoring of pH is virtually impossible. It has to be done one at a time. And so we do not know in any way that CO2 has changed the pH of the oceans. There's no way to know that. The theory would be that it hasn't, because there is actually no evidence that CO2 is being absorbed at a higher rate by the oceans due to the higher amount in the atmosphere. We don't know that for sure. We do know that higher CO2 is resulting in much higher vegetation growth all around the world, especially where it is drier, because CO2 increase also makes plants more efficient with water. So places where only grasslands can live now because it's too dry for trees are coming out onto those areas due to the higher CO2 which we have caused in the atmosphere.